1995. Hollywood, an expensive studio project, and in the lead roles, an action star with a $15 million per film salary and a young actor everyone is already whispering about as the next big thing. It seemed like a standard success story. But here's the interesting part. The action star agreed to work for practically nothing, and the young actor, instead of preparing for his role with a coach, spent several weeks in a real psychiatric clinic, observing patients and absorbing their behavior. His co-star said that sometimes they couldn't tell where the acting ended and something else began. The director of this film had already been at war with Universal Studios, publicly through full-page advertisements in Hollywood trade papers. And now that same studio was giving him money and creative freedom for a new project. Why? Because they had no choice. Because directors like this had a line forming of Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt, ready to work with him for next to nothing. This is the story of 12 Monkeys from 1995, a film that became not just a hit, but a cultural phenomenon. A film that grew out of a 28-minute French short shot on a still camera, and one that still asks questions cinema has no answers for. Hello, you're watching Just Sneak. We dig where regular reviews don't reach, into the scandals, secrets, and uncomfortable truths of big cinema. Subscribe right now so you don't miss our next deep dives. We need to start with the source, because without understanding that source, it's impossible to understand why 12 Monkeys turned out the way it did. In 1962 in France, at the height of the Cold War, when the world truly thought about nuclear catastrophe as a real possibility rather than an abstraction, a young director named Chris Marker made a 28-minute film called La Jetée, Pier. And this film was made almost entirely from photographs. Still photographs with voiceover and sound. Only one tiny fragment, a single moment of movement, is used as a cinematic device. It was a post-apocalyptic story about a man whom scientists send into the past using a time machine. All he has from the past is the image of a woman's face on an airport pier, an image that has haunted him since childhood. In the finale, it turns out that this is the image of his own death, which he witnessed as a child. The loop is closed. 28 minutes, photographs, voiceover, no famous stars, no studio budget, and yet, one of the most quoted and influential science fiction films in cinema history. Chris Marker himself was an almost mythical figure. His real name was Christian Francois Bouche Villeneuve. He never gave interviews. He categorically refused to be photographed. A man who filmed hundreds of people on celluloid himself practically didn't exist in photographs. He died in 2012 at the age of 91, and most obituaries use the same blurry photograph of unknown origin. He was a ghost in his own biography, and it was this ghost that inspired Universal Pictures to create a feature-length Hollywood film. How did this happen? Universal bought the rights to adapt La Jetée and commissioned the screenplay from David and Janet Peoples. If David Peoples' name sounds familiar, it should. He wrote Blade Runner. Yes, that Blade Runner, from 1982. And Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. A man who knows how to work with complex, non-linear narratives with philosophical depth. Together with his wife Janet, they reworked the compact French story into a full-fledged American screenplay, keeping the heart of the story while adding detective elements, characters, and that signature paranoia that makes a good sci-fi thriller raw. Unforgettable. Now comes the question of the director. And here the story takes on a completely different scale. Terry Gilliam. If you don't know that name, fix that immediately. Gilliam was born in Minneapolis in 1940, grew up in California, and eventually moved to Britain, where he became part of what was probably the most influential comedy group in the English language, Monty Python. While the other Pythons wrote sketches and played characters, Gilliam did animation. His collaged, surreal animation became the group's visual signature. Those grotesque, whimsical images with flying legs and inflating cheeks, that's his work. And it was through this animation lens that he later looked at cinema. His first solo directing works, Time Bandits from 1981 and Brazil from 1985, cemented his reputation as a director with an absolutely unique visual language. Claustrophobic interiors, fisheye lenses that distort space, machines that look simultaneously ancient and fantastically futuristic, bureaucratic labyrinths with no way out. This style is called steampunk long before the word itself entered common usage. But Brazil was not just a creative success, it became a battleground. And this battle changed Gilliam's entire subsequent career. 1985. Gilliam made Brazil for Universal Pictures, a dystopian satire about a totalitarian state built on absurdity and Kafkaesque bureaucratic horror. The film was released in Europe in the director's cut of 142 minutes and immediately received ecstatic reviews, but the American branch of Universal, under President Sid Sheinberg, refused to release the film in that form. The studio demanded the ending be changed to make it happy, to cut nearly 50 minutes, to turn a dystopia into a love story. This version was titled Love Conquers All. Gilliam refused. A war began. Refused. A war began. Gilliam arranged secret screenings of his version in private homes and university auditoriums. The studio tried to stop these screenings. Critics and the filmmaking community were divided. At some point, Gilliam did something unprecedented. He bought a full-page ad in the Hollywood trade paper Variety. It contained only one line: "Dear Sid Sheinberg, when are you going to release my film Brazil? Terry Gilliam." A director's public appeal to a studio president through a newspaper advertisement. That doesn't happen in Hollywood. Or almost never. The Los Angeles Film Critics Association named Brazil the best film of the year before it even had an American release. This put Universal in an absurd position. The studio was sitting on the best film of the year. In the end, Gilliam won. His version was released, albeit in a shortened 131-minute cut that was a compromise between the director's vision and the distributor's demands. Sheinberg's version was later shown on American television and became a textbook example of how studio interference destroys artistic expression. After Brazil, Gilliam's relationship with Hollywood became complicated. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen went over budget and struggled to find a distributor. The Fisher King with Robin Williams became Gilliam's first commercially successful film in a long time. It grossed $42 million on a $24 million budget. And it was precisely this success that opened the door to 12 Monkeys. Now let's talk about what could have gone terribly wrong during casting, and why we know the film the way we do rather than a completely different one. For the role of James Cole, the protagonist, a prisoner from the future sent into the past, two actors were initially considered with whom Gilliam had very different chemistry: Sylvester Stallone and Robert De Niro. De Niro at one point was close to signing the contract. Imagine 12 Monkeys with De Niro in the lead. It would have been a completely different film, heavier, more oppressive, with a different tone. De Niro ultimately declined, according to various sources, due to scheduling conflicts, according to others, because he disagreed with the interpretation of the role. In the end, Bruce Willis came to the project, and that in itself was an event. Because Willis at that point was one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood, his standard fee at the time was about $15 million per picture, an amount that alone would have almost doubled the entire budget of 12 Monkeys. And Willis agreed to work for practically nothing. No upfront payment, only a share of the box office profits, because he wanted to work with Gilliam. That's rare. That's rare. Stars of this magnitude rarely agree to such terms for an artistic project. Gilliam, in turn, didn't want Bruce Willis action star. He wanted Bruce Willis actor. He was looking for vulnerability, confusion. A man who doesn't know what's real and what isn't. Some might call this against type. Gilliam called it hitting the bullseye. If you've seen 12 Monkeys, drop a comment about whether Willis' performance convinced you. I'm curious how different people perceive him in this role. The role of Jeffrey Goins, the eccentric, instantly recognizable character in the psychiatric institution, has an even more interesting story. Johnny Depp was considered for it. Depp, easy to imagine. At that time, he specialized in exactly that kind of eccentric, slightly mad charm. But in the end, the casting director, Marjorie Simkin, literally insisted to Gilliam that they cast Brad Pitt. Gilliam had doubts. Pitt was a hot name after Interview with the Vampire and Legends of the Fall, but not someone with a reputation as a serious actor in psychologically complex roles. And then Pitt did something unexpected. Even before filming began, he spent several weeks in the psychiatric ward of Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia. Not as a patient, as an observer. He received permission to be present in the ward, observe people, talk to them. He studied their mannerisms, speech patterns, and how they looked at the world. This preparation lasted weeks. Right here on Just Sneak, we talk not only about what you see on screen, but also about what's behind it. If you're here for the first time, subscribe right now. We have many more such deep dives ahead. Let's move to the production process And here the really good stories begin. Principal photography for 12 Monkeys took place from February to May 1995 in Philadelphia and Baltimore. The budget was $29.5 million. By Hollywood standards, with 2 stars of this caliber, that's very little. Gilliam knew this, and he worked in these conditions with an obsession known only to him. There was a story that happened in the first days of work and immediately became a legend among the crew. The scene where Willis's character draws blood from his own hand. In the background, you can see the shadow of a hamster running in a wheel. It seems like a detail. A technically insignificant background detail. Gilliam spent an entire day on it. The entire shooting day went into making the hamster's shadow fall exactly that way, at exactly that moment, at exactly that angle. The crew started calling this phenomenon the hamster factor. Later, a separate documentary was made about Gilliam's work on set, The Hamster Factor and Other Tales of 12 Monkeys. The psychiatric scenes were shot in a real location, the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. This is an abandoned 19th century correctional facility with radial architecture and an oppressive Gothic atmosphere. The idea to use it instead of sets belonged to Gilliam. He wanted the walls the actors walked through to carry authentic history of confinement and suffering. You don't need to simulate the material if it already exists. The future scenes were shot at an abandoned power plant. Again, not sets, but a real industrial site that Gilliam turned into a set for his own imagination. His signature technique: find real places where the visual language he needs already lives. And now, the most unexpected episode in this entire story. It's not about the director, not about a lawsuit. It's about an actor who was initially unwanted for the role. Now about Brad Pitt, because here the story becomes quite unusual. Gilliam, despite accepting Pitt for the role, remained skeptical. He was afraid Pitt couldn't handle the key scene, the long, chaotic, nervous monologue of Jeffrey Goins in the psychiatric ward. The very monologue everyone remembers now. Gilliam sent him to a speech therapist. Pitt worked on tempo and rhythm of speech, and then Gilliam did something unexpected. On the eve of that scene, he took away Pitt's cigarettes, just removed them. And in this state of nicotine withdrawal, nervousness, and irritation, he went on set and played that scene. It worked. Jeffrey Goins' nervous twitching in that scene is not entirely an acting choice. It's partly physiology. There was something else few people know about. Jeffrey Goins' cross-eyed look was Pitt's own idea. He suggested wearing a special contact lens that obscured his real iris and simulated a squinting pupil, a visual detail invented by the actor, not the director. And it made the character even more physically uncomfortable to watch. Pitt also decided to stop consuming caffeine during filming, in addition to not having cigarettes. A state of physical unease became a working tool. And now, about the event that could have ended the entire project. During filming, Terry Gilliam went horseback riding, and he fell. The fall was serious, almost fatal, as crew members later said. Gilliam was injured and had to rest for several days. For a director who personally controls every detail of the production process, forced downtime on set is a catastrophe, especially with a tight budget and schedule. And despite all this, the tight budget, the near-fatal accident, technical problems with futuristic mechanical props, difficulties with winter location shooting in Philadelphia, Gilliam delivered the film a week early and on budget. 12 Monkeys is the only one of his films that came out on time and didn't exceed the budget. The only one in his entire career. But even in this relatively smooth production, there was room for a legal scandal. In February 1996, after the film's release, architect and artist Libius Woods sued Universal Pictures. He claimed that one of the set designs in the film, a structure of a suspended chair in metal frames, was nearly identical to his work titled Neo-Mechanical Tower, Upper Chamber. When the images were placed side by side, the similarity was obvious. Woods won the case. Universal paid him a six-figure sum in compensation. The scenes with this design remained in the film, but their price went up. By the way, have you ever noticed cases in cinema where visual design is clearly borrowed? Drop a comment if you recall any examples. Now, about the film itself. Without too many spoilers, but enough to understand why it works the way it does. 2035, Earth after a pandemic. A deadly virus has wiped out most of humanity. The survivors live underground in conditions that can barely be called living. James Cole is a prisoner offered a deal. Travel to the past, to 1996. Gather information about the Army of the 12 Monkeys, an organization allegedly involved in creating the virus. If Cole succeeds, he'll be freed. He agrees. The problem is, the time machine isn't very accurate. Cole ends up not where and not when he should. He finds himself in a psychiatric hospital. He's declared insane. And here he meets two people. Psychiatrist Catherine Rayleigh, who tries to help him, and Jeffrey Goins, a paranoid, obsessive cellmate with clear messianic ambitions, whose father, by the way, is a leading virologist. I'll stop recapping the plot here, because 12 Monkeys is a film that should catch you off guard. Its non-linear structure, its play with memory, reality, and paranoia, these aren't just plot devices. They're the theme. Gilliam asks, how do we even know what's real? If a man is convinced he's from the future, is that madness or truth? And who decides where the line is? This question in 1995 was an intellectual provocation. In 2020, when the world experienced a real pandemic, this film took on a completely different dimension. People rewatched 12 Monkeys during lockdowns and felt something frightening and familiar. Because a good sci-fi film is always a conversation about the present, just dressed in a future costume. The film also owes a great deal to Hitchcock's Vertigo. Gilliam didn't hide this. He built direct visual and narrative references to Vertigo into the fabric of the picture. The theme of an obsessive image that haunts someone from the past. The theme of a woman who can never be fully known. The theme of fate you can't escape, even if you travel through time. This is what La Jetée borrowed from Hitchcock. And 12 Monkeys close that loop. On December 29, 1995, the film was released in American theaters. And here begins another chapter of this story. On a budget of $29.5 million, 12 Monkeys grossed $168,800,000 worldwide, nearly 6 times its budget. For a film without a traditional action narrative with a non-linear structure and philosophical ambitions, this was a phenomenal result. Critics were overwhelmingly enthusiastic. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film still holds an 88% approval rating. But the main event for the whole team was the awards ceremony. Brad Pitt won a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor and was nominated for an Oscar in the same category. This was recognition for a man who, less than a year earlier, some had perceived as just a pretty face from action movies. After 12 Monkeys, the conversation about Pitt changed forever. This was the moment he became serious. What else is important to know about this film? And by the way, if you have a favorite fact about this movie that I haven't mentioned, write it in the comments. Always interesting to see what people notice who watch the film before this deep dive. There are several details that rarely make it into standard reviews. First, Bruce Willis worked on the psychological side of the role, using a method that was uncharacteristic for him. Gilliam wanted to see him frightened, confused, unprotected. Willis read a lot of literature about paranoia and dissociation, about people who can't distinguish memories from reality. He deliberately refused his usual on-screen confidence. This went against his instinct. And as a result, his Cole is one of the most unexpected performances in his career. Second, screenwriters David and Janet Peoples originally wrote a script in which Catherine Rayleigh's role was significantly small. Madeleine Stowe, who ultimately played this role, convinced Gilliam to expand the character's arc. In the final film, her character is not just a functional figure, but a full-fledged semantic center of the story. It's through her that the viewer navigates the narrative chaos. Third, Chris Marker, the mysterious French director whose La Jetée was adapted into 12 Monkeys. Marker gave permission for the adaptation, but he never publicly commented on the result. A man who avoided publicity his entire life made no exception for the most famous remake of his work. He simply accepted the fee and remained silent, which, in general, is entirely in character. Fourth, about the soundtrack. The music was composed by Paul Buckmaster, who had previously worked with Elton John. In 12 Monkeys, he created something fundamentally different. An anxious, mechanistic soundscape in which orchestral fragments blend with industrial noise. This music doesn't decorate the picture, it deforms it. Exactly what Gilliam needs. And finally, about what remained off-screen. There were rumors of tension between Willis and Pitt on set. Not hostile, but professionally competitive. Pitt was in full immersion mode and sometimes behaved unconventionally between takes, staying in character. Willis, accustomed to a clear boundary between scene and break, was initially puzzled. Gilliam, according to some accounts, deliberately maintained this tension, It benefited the scenes where their characters share the same space. Now for the analysis. What exactly made 12 Monkeys a film still discussed today? First and foremost, structural honesty. Gilliam doesn't explain everything. He doesn't put up signposts. He throws the viewer into a non-linear narrative and trusts them to piece it together themselves. For a blockbuster with a budget of nearly $30 million, this is a rare degree of boldness. Studios usually demand everything be explained to the viewer. Gilliam refused, and Universal, remembering Brazil, was wise enough not to insist this time. Second, working with memory as an unreliable witness. Everything Cole knows about his mission. He knows from memories that may be false, distorted, or simply invented symptoms of psychosis. The film doesn't answer the question of what's real until the very end. And even in the finale, the answer isn't definitive. This is rare intellectual trust in the audience. Third, a visual language inseparable from the theme. Gilliam uses wide-angle lenses that distort space and make it hostile. Sets where there's always something extra, something sticking out, something that doesn't fit the logic. The past looks as strange and hostile as the future. There isn't a single time period that's normal. This is intentional, whereas the film imperfect. The middle part occasionally sags. Some scenes explaining the mechanics of time travel are more functional than interesting. The thread about suspicious organizations as potential creators of the army of the 12 Monkeys is a bit confusing even on close viewing. But these are minor complaints compared to what works. As for cultural influence, it turned out to be significant and unexpected. In 2015, the Sci-Fi Channel aired a TV series called 12 Monkeys, not a repetition of the film's plot, but an independent story in the same universe. This is evidence that the original concept had enough potential to evolve. And one more thing that must be said. 12 Monkeys was released a few months after Through the Looking Glass by Terry Gilliam. No, wait. That's not his film. Instead, it came out in the same season as The Creep and John Carpenter. No, I'm not talking about that. The film came out the same year as Seven, in which Brad Pitt played a detective. 2 films in 1 year, 2 fundamentally different roles. 2 major critical successes. 1995 turned Brad Pitt from a star into an actor. 12 Monkeys played a key role in this. So what is 12 Monkeys in the end? It's a film that emerged from a 30-second idea. Take a 28-minute French short made of photographs, directed by an invisible filmmaker in the early 60s, and turn it into a Hollywood blockbuster. A task that sounds absurd. The result is a genre cinema masterpiece that simultaneously entertains and asks uncomfortable questions. It's a film that made a Golden Globe winner out of someone the studio saw as just a poster star. That proved you can make smart cinema for moderate money and earn 6 times your budget at the box office. That just once in his career made Terry Gilliam deliver work ahead of schedule and within budget, which, by the way, is itself a small miracle. It's a film about a virus made 25 years before the pandemic, about paranoia in an era when the word conspiracy theory hadn't yet become everyday language, about a man no one believes because what he says is too incredible, and about the fact that the incredible sometimes turns out to be true. Gilliam never made films about what was comfortable to hear. Not in Brazil, not in The Fisher King, not here. In 12 Monkeys, he packaged his usual themes: bureaucratic absurdity, institutional dysfunction, the unreliability of memory and reason, in a shell accessible to a mass audience. And that's why this film works on multiple levels simultaneously. As an adventure thriller, as a psychological drama, and as a philosophical statement about the nature of reality. Chris Marker never commented on 12 Monkeys. He died in 2012, leaving behind not a single publicly known photograph taken with his participation. A ghost that gave birth to one of the best science fiction films of the 90s. Wells, Orwell, Hitchcock, Marker, Gilliam. That's the approximate lineage of this film. Not a bad company. Have you seen 12 Monkeys? And if so, what's the main thing for you? The plot puzzle, Pitt's performance, Gilliam's visual style, or something else entirely? Write in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how different people see this film. This has been Just Sneak. Until the next deep dive. Wherever it smells of sulfur, there's always a story they tried to hide.